Coruscant was the heartworld of the Republic and the Empire. With its colossal population and incredible infrastructure, it represented a glowing jewel in the core. However, upon the Empire's defeat at Endor, this would quickly fall into anarchy under a puppet government controlled by the Imperial secret police. But why exactly did Coruscant become one of the deadliest planets, perhaps in the entire galaxy? Now, firstly, we need to understand what exactly happened on Coruscant. We see at the end of Return of the Jedi people rejoicing in the streets, launching fireworks and celebrating. However, this initial celebration was very early, and it only represented the beginning of a very long war to come for Coruscant's many citizens. The world had been ran as a police state since the Empire's conception, and Palptine and the ISB, the Imperial Security Bureau, or secret police if you will, had worked very hard to create the illusion of prosperity on the world, raising statues and overhauling the architecture, for example. Now, this also involved moving non-humans away from the city's more prosperous areas and towards the slums to promote the human superiority narrative that the Empire thrived on. In some cases, in fact, such as the Mon Calamari following the subjugation of their world, they were largely just deported from the planet altogether, because the Empire saw them as a potential threat. They would easily become rebel sympathizers in theory. Despite all this, we need to remember the fact that anti-imperial sentiment had been rife on the world for a long time. In fact, following the destruction of Alderaan, many of Coruscant's citizens held a vigil that was brutally broken apart by imperial forces. So now that the Emperor was dead, the time came where people believed that they could rise up. The problem here was that the Rebellion and the soon-to-be-formed New Republic were half the galaxy away from the core. And they had a lot of fighting to go before they would be there to help with this uprising. So this was very much in the hands of the people of the world, with very, very little engagement with the larger Rebel Alliance. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail about the actual timeline of what happened during the rebellion on Coruscant. However, I will give you some quick highlights. Grand Vizier Mas Amedda becomes the de facto leader of the world and somewhat the Chancellor of the Empire, if you want to call him that. Despite this, Fleet Admiral Gallius Rex, who was really the one calling the shots after Palpatine's death, decided that Coruscant was no longer important. He believed that this world represented the decay that led to the Empire's defeat, and for this reason, he withdrew the Imperial Navy from the world, and refused to send reinforcements to quell the quickly rising anti-Imperial sentiment. In this power vacuum left behind by Gallius's refusal to help, the Imperial Security Bureau took control. And if we know anything about the ISB, is that generally they are the most cunning and sometimes even the cruelest of Imperials. They take control of the military and use their own ships to blockade the world. They also effectively dethrone Mas Amedda, keeping him under house arrest and using him to create propaganda. He was very, very much the unwilling face to the ISB's pretty nefarious actions. Now, this leads to further civil unrest on Coruscant, and then eventually Mas Amedda is helped to be freed by insurgents. He escapes Coruscant and the war is ended by the signing of the Galactic Concordance. Meanwhile, the ISB chooses to flee Coruscant and effectively secedes the world to the New Republic. Now, what I really want to talk about for a moment here is really focus on how terrible this entire time period must have been for the everyday citizens of Coruscant. You see, it had a population of over 1 trillion individuals, and that amount of people means that any form of civil unrest is often disastrous and has a very, very high cost in human life. Firstly, we have the ISB. They will have worked to round up and execute anyone who they believed would turn against them. And the big thing about the ISB is that no one is above suspicion. It's very likely they will have been arresting and probably executing without trial anyone who they felt had the slightest chance of turning against them. Effectively, they were unleashing their own campaign of terror across the world to slow the public's ability to take control. The ISB was using the Federal District as their base of operations, and likely only left to launch short but bloody campaigns against the people of Coruscant. So that's pretty bad to start off with. However, we also need to consider the sheer amount of citizens who were rioting. As we say, these people had no real affiliation to the New Republic or the Rebellion, and for this reason, they weren't held to the same rules and conduct in many of the riots taking place. We know that the Rebel Alliance, for example, was strongly against senseless violence and unnecessary cruelty. That's why many groups were exiled from the larger organisation. But majority of the people fighting on the war on Coruscant weren't held to these same beliefs. We have to imagine that there was a great deal of mob justice for potential Imperial sympathisers being hunted down. It's very likely the actual protesters and rioters on Coruscant were just as dangerous as the ISB agents. And this is before we even consider other entities that will have been getting involved. Coruscant had a ripe criminal underbelly, and these people will have definitely moved to seize control of assets, carrying out crimes and settling old scores, while the Empire and its citizens were battling it out. So it's inevitable that gangs who were traditionally kept to the lower levels and slums will have risen up to more densely populated areas to take control of huge amounts of territory. Now, finally, and possibly most importantly, we should discuss infrastructure. We've talked numerous times before about how worlds like Coruscant only function because they rely on trade from other worlds. Food, water, machinery, etc. Although Coruscant will undoubtedly create some of these supplies on its own, realistically it's going to be nowhere near the amount it needs to take care of its entire population. For this reason, it's very, very likely that a famine will have happened, along with power outages, huge damages to infrastructure, and other very important things such as clean, drinkable water. We need to imagine that criminals will have seized control over a lot of these important assets such as water purifiers and supplies, and they will have sold them at extortionate rates. Meanwhile, Imperials likely moved to destroy many of these assets to weaken the rebels. Meanwhile, rebel cells probably took control of these assets and likely prioritized sending these supplies to the people who were fighting the war, meaning that everyday citizens who were just trying to survive probably had a pretty hard time getting basic necessities that they needed to survive. We should also consider the fact that since the Empire was focusing on repelling the rebels, day-to-day tasks were being neglected. One big way I see this has been a problem is fires. It's very likely that entire blocks will have gone up in flames, and the Imperials will have failed to stop them, as they were in rebel territory, meaning that everyday citizens could have their entire livelihoods wiped out overnight. Honestly, I personally believe that Coruscant would be one of the worst worlds to survive on during the Galactic Civil War. And although we don't have any real account of what life was like during this period on the Heart World, I would assume that it would be very desolate. There was no real way of escaping the conflict. Like it or not, on Coruscant during this period, the Empire was the stabilizing factor. It kept the power on. It kept the fire brigade putting fires out. It made sure that shipments of food were arriving. And as soon as the Empire is off balance and is now focusing on maintaining control and running a terror state, then a lot of these things are going to go out the window. But what do you guys think? What would life on Coruscant be like? And where would be the worst place to be in the entire galaxy during this period? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. I really do hope that you enjoyed this video. If so, please remember to like, share, and sub, as it is really appreciated and it helps the channel grow. Also, don't forget to tick the bell and follow me on Twitter at The Lore Guide to get updates whenever I upload any new content. But most importantly, thank you so much for coming in today. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you're all having a great day. Hope you're all staying safe, and I'll see you next time.